Okay, well, thank you for coming to hear about the seven valleys, mostly a little bit about the four valleys. And also thank you for allowing me this opportunity to share it with you, because this tablet is absolutely one of my favorites. And I consider this, in a sense, my home. No matter where I have gone or what I have done in my life as a Baha'i, I always return here. And this has become for me the framework and the context through which I approach everything else regarding spiritual life. And I have always thought of this tablet very much as if it were a treasure map. And the territory that this treasure map is trying to guide me through is my own being. And that there is, at the end of that being, a treasure sort of latent within every single human being that the revelation is meant to guide us toward and to illumine and bring into the light. And he actually does say in the text that the heart is the wellspring of divine treasures. Manba' khazine Allahi. So just a little brief introduction about myself. My name is John Wigley. I'm living here in West Sacramento, very, very close to Nabil. In fact, we're about 5 houses away. I've been a Baha'i for just over 30 years now. I was a student of philosophy at George Mason University, right? That was where I discovered the faith as well and declared in my first year. I have also been a computer software developer since before the university. Since that was my occupation and profession, I decided to study something different at university than computers. But my interests have always been in the realm of philosophy, reason, logic, mathematics, and then also mysticism. So when I discovered that there was this mystical component to the Baha'i faith, you can imagine that I dove right into it. And when I first encountered the seven valleys, well, I'll actually talk about this in a little bit later. I do have a website where I like to talk, I like to write about these sort of subjects, a lot about the seven valleys and other mystical subjects. So at johnwigley.com, if you're ever curious, usually it's in the form of very short essays or poems. Today's presentation was labeled Four Valleys and Seven Valleys. There's not really enough time, though, to go through both texts and do them justice. So I want to just have one slide here on the Four Valleys. It's something people ask about a lot, and the connection between the two tablets. The only thing we really know for sure about the Four Valleys and the Seven Valleys and their connection is the Guardian says that they were revealed at different times to different people and should be regarded as separate tablets. And that's all we know. So although many authors have posited connections of various kinds between the tablets, I can't do that here because I really have no basis for doing so. I also find that the character of the text in the Four Valleys is a little bit different, because whereas the Seven Valleys is described rather clearly as a progression of stages, the Four Valleys is more presented in the sense of different paths one might take to God depending upon how you see God, or how you orient yourself to God. So depending on which of his attributes it is that you are seeking, there will be a different path or a different course that you might follow. And he gives out 4 of them, and each one is related to a name. So those who seek maqsood, or the desired one, the intended one, he says that plane pertaineth to the self, but the self which is not to be shunned, the self which is beloved because it adheres to the will of its Lord. Those who seek Mahmud, or the all-praised, is the station of the intellect, where man is approaching God through reason, but specifically the divine reason. The Majzub, or ecstasy, absolute rapture, or the lodestone of hearts, as they've translated it, this is the domain of love, where nothing is acceptable but love. And then finally, Mahbub is the station of the throne of the inmost heart. And it is a remarkable valley, the way that it is described and the characteristics of the wayfarers there. So you could see these as different modes by which a person might approach God, each according to their own predilection and insight. So that is very much in brief the Four Valleys. I would love to talk about it another time, but I think with 1 hour, we will have our hands full with the 7. Going now to the Seven Valleys, Shoghi Effendi writes that the Seven Valleys is a treatise that may well be regarded as Baha'u'llah's greatest mystical composition, which he wrote in answer to the questions of Sheikh Muhyiddin, the Ghazi of Khanighain, in which he describes the 7 stages which the soul of the seeker must needs traverse ere it can attain the object of its existence. And I really love that description, because to me, it makes it seem like, you know, some people try to conquer Mount Everest and they spend their whole lives to climb it and feel that they've accomplished. And I think that, like, this is the Baha'i Mount Everest. This is really the challenge, that we're meant to scale its heights. Sheikh Muhyiddin, I'm not going to read this, but I just want to give the sense that Baha'u'llah was writing this text to a person that he met likely during his withdrawal into the mountains of Kurdistan. And he met many Sufi leaders of that time. And there was a very positive and loving relationship that he had there, because he was making no claims. There were no threats to the authority. And so there was it was a very different time. And out of that time have come many mystical writings. And some of those Sufis that he met posted questions to him later. And Baha'u'llah would write back questions and answers in response in the form of these tablets that we have, that are just laden with descriptions of his love for that individual, or how much he was moved by the beauty that he found inherent in their question. And those traces of that love are you can find it throughout the text as he's writing to these people. Sheikh Muhyiddin, from context, appears pretty clear that he was asking some questions in relation to a different Sufi text called the Conference of the Birds. And the Conference of the Birds was written by Fariduddin Attar, and it's quite a long text written in the form of a poem that describes a flock of birds, a lot of them, thousands and thousands of birds, that all say that they want to find their ideal king. They're seeking the one who should rule over them and show them what is the right way to live. And the bird who is to guide them all is the hoopoe, or the, there's another word people use for hoopoe, but it's like the guide bird. And the guide bird starts telling them, you know, we're going to encounter a lot of difficulties. And once he says that, one by one, the different birds start giving their reasons for why they can't undertake the journey. So the nightingale says, I'm too much in love with the rose, I couldn't possibly leave it. Or the partridge says, you know, I'm too worried about collecting enough grain for my young ones, I cannot leave it. And they just keep all saying why it is that they can't undertake this arduous journey. Well, at the end of all these excuses, there is a few hundred birds left. And then the hoopoe tells them, okay, for us to now prosecute this journey, we are going to have to go through 7 stages. And these 7 stages that he lays out are almost exactly the 7 valleys that Baha'u'llah is laying out. So Baha'u'llah is answering the text in a sense by re-revealing it. Now, in Attar's delineation, unity and knowledge, their order is flipped. But other than that, it follows very closely. And many of the stories that Attar gives to illustrate his points, Baha'u'llah repeats those stories. And he may lengthen some, or he may abbreviate some of those stories. Then at the end of the 7 valleys, there are birds just, you know, they're dropping like flies because this is such a difficult journey to follow. At the very, very end, there are but 30 birds left. And they get to the mountain, the great mountain of Qaf, which has been referenced in other texts of Baha'u'llah. It is symbolic of the revelation of the Quran. And when they get to the chamber of the king, all they find in that chamber is a gigantic mirror. And so this whole time, they have been seeking their immortal king, which they think of as the phoenix, the greatest of all the birds, the one who is resurrected from death to become alive again. And the word for phoenix in Persian is simurg. So they've all been seeking the simurg all this time. Well, somewhat as a pun, if you take the word simurg and you break it into simurg, it means 30 birds. So here they come into this chamber with this gigantic mirror, and the 30 birds look into the mirror and they see simurg. And then they realize that what they have sought all along was their own reality, and that the divine is reflected within them, which is a very strong Sufi motif. So this is the context this is what Baha'u'llah is speaking to when he's writing to Sheikh Muhyiddin. Now Baha'u'llah has made a comment about his own 7 valleys. This has not been translated yet officially into English. It's from a text called Yadnameya Mesbah-e Monir and was published by Wahid Rafati. But I did find a provisional translation of it that I wanted to share with you. So Baha'u'llah says, regarding what thou hast written about the treatise of the mystic journey which was revealed in the Persian tongue, This work was revealed in the vernacular of the people in the days prior to my declaration. What prompted its revelation was a letter sent to the Most Holy Court by a person from the Sunni branch in Iraq who was both a scholar and a mystic. Consequently, for reasons of divine wisdom, this treatise was revealed in a mode that prevailed among the people. In this day, however, any soul who turns his face toward the supreme horizon and recognizes God hath already traversed the 7 valleys or 7 stations mentioned in that work. For in this revelation, the vain imaginings of the past have been cleft asunder. After the recognition of God, all are commanded to acquire knowledge in such sciences as can profit humanity, and to reject superstitions and vain imaginings. We beseech God to confirm his servants to do what he hath desired for them, from the wonders of his generosity, bounty, and favor. Verily, he is the guardian of them that have turned unto him, and the Lord of such as are wholly devoted to him. And what I like about this paragraph is that in different places in the writings, we have indications that the writings we receive are, in a sense, in our language. Baha'u'llah is writing in terms that we can understand. And so because of that, a lot of time is spent talking about things that are not necessarily the most meaningful things, but they are the things we need to hear to grow, to understand the mistakes that we've made in the past, and for humanity to move toward its maturity. And in the hidden words, he says, don't think that what I have revealed is in accordance with the melody of our own voice. Rather, it is in accordance with humans and their capacity to receive. So in writing to these Sufi individuals like Sheikh Muhyiddin, Baha'u'llah is speaking to them in their language, using their stories, using their metaphors. And the Sufis really went into this idea of spiritual stations and schemes. And there were people who would devote their lives to talking about, delineating, really getting into all of these degrees of spiritual elevation. Whereas the real task here is transformation of character and then transformation of society. We're not meant to be spending all of our time retreating into a mountain to become ascetic monks and dwell on these arcane spiritual mysteries. It should all be rooted in practice and experience, which has become a common refrain with our institute process, for example. So I found it interesting that Baha'u'llah actually gives this warning here, that these stages are revealed based on what has been in the past, but for us to avoid superstitions, for us to be building too much of a castle on this foundation. Abdu'l-Baha also had something to say about the 7 valleys. He said, strive with all your power to be free from imperfections. Heedless souls are always seeking faults in others. What can the hypocrite know of others' faults when he is blind to his own? This is the meaning of the words in the 7 valleys. It is a guide for human conduct. As long as a man does not find his own faults, he can never become perfect. Nothing is more fruitful for man than the knowledge of his own shortcomings. The Blessed Perfection says, I wonder at the man who does not find his own imperfections. I was always very struck by this description of the 7 valleys as a guide for human conduct, because it doesn't seem to be in the nature of the ethical prescriptions that one finds in a lot of the hidden words or other texts. It seems very much in this lofty mystical mode, but here Abdu'l-Baha is connecting it with behavior. And what I kind of get from this is that the 7 valleys does describe itself as being very much about the vision of the wayfarer. What we see when we see the world, what we see when we look at the manifestations of God or when we think about God. And if you think about it, vision drives behavior. We behave differently depending on how we see things, how we understand them. And so the 7 valleys, take for example, Baha'u'llah, when he talks about how we shouldn't ever contend with one another or get into argument. And he says, if you find yourself in that situation, behold me standing before you, and love the other person for my own name's sake. Well, to look at other human beings and yet see God within them, that is a part of this critical vision that I think that the 7 valleys is guiding us toward. And that would then lead to a different behavior, because we would treat people as if they were representatives of God and not merely, just any old person. I also want to make a note here on, well, what is Baha'i mysticism? because I've been describing these texts as mystical as if that word had meaning to everybody here, but I want to kind of clarify what I think of when I think of the term mystical or Baha'i mysticism. And after studying the mystical traditions of many different faiths, the definition that I have arrived at for my own self, my own thought on this, is that mysticism is when one patterns their life around a reality that cannot be witnessed. So we live this life, for example, we see the things that are around us that are evident. We pattern our daily activities around this physical reality that we have to deal with. But again and again, the writings tell us that there is a larger context. There is a spiritual world, and our actions have an impact on our future life in that spiritual world. Conversely, that spiritual world has an impact on us. If we say a prayer, a single prayer with a pure-hearted devotion, it can affect every single human being on the planet. These are what we are told about the reality of the spiritual world. Well, if that world is so real, then it would make sense that we should alter our lives in accord with what we understand about that world. Yet we don't know it. We cannot necessarily put it easily to test. But to live one's life in that way anyway, to make a bedrock of faith upon which we base our future decisions and actions, to me, that is mysticism. We are trying to know a thing that is unknowable. We are incorporating into the fabric of our lives a reality we have not witnessed, but nevertheless hold to be real. In the past, when mystics would try to align themselves with the unseen world, the path to do this was always very negative in nature. So going back to any of the past traditions, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Jainism, any of them, the path to mystical enlightenment was found by fasting, seclusion, abstinence, and self-abnegation. A person who really wanted to live a mystical life would become a monk, or they would become a hermit. They would withdraw from society. And they did this to sort of honor this fundamental principle that there is no God but God. So in order to find God, you have to wipe the slate clean of all the things that are not God. Only by reducing the noise in your life to an absolute minimum does it become silent enough for you to hear this inner voice at the heart of creation. And this was the mystical mode for many, many decades. Millennia. But Baha'u'llah has given us something brand new in the realm of mystical truth, which is a positive conception of mysticism that is still just as mystical, still just as rooted in consideration of the unseen. But now we're meant to seek God through work, relationships, family, study, and an active community life. And this is reflected in a shift from the pivotal statement about faith being there is no God but God, to this new formulation, he is God, which is something stated that you will not find in past faiths. This positive assertion that he is God, which does not begin with this negative statement or declaration. So in brief, then, being a devotee of the sun now, in past times, it would be a person who would give up all lesser lights. Like, I'm about the sun, I don't even want to deal with anything else. But in the Baha'i mode, we realize that all other lights derive their brilliance from that sun. Everything is derivative of God. And so in like manner, when we look to all things, we can see God in them and have a relationship to God through all things, including our work, including our study, including each other. Does anyone have any questions that they want to pose before I move on?
No questions in the chat.
Okay. How does the Seven Valleys fit in with some other texts in the Baha'i revelation? For a long time, I sort of regarded the Seven Valleys as unique and on its own because there were no other texts quite like it. The Four Valleys is a bit like it in the nature of its exposition, but it seemed a bit unique, for example, compared to the Kitab-i-Iqan. But a few years ago, we had a new text translated for us in English, which is Gems of Divine Mysteries. And this connection between these three texts is also written about in Nader Saidi's book, Logos and Civilization. because it really draws an interesting connection between these texts. The seven valleys is this very, very mystical description of the seven stages of the soul of the seeker and its progression toward God, whereas the Kitab-i-Iqan is an exposition on the lives and history of the manifestations of God, their connection with each other, and how they were treated by the people. Whereas the Gems of the Divine Mysteries is, in a sense, a merging of these two modes of presentation, because just like the seven valleys, it too describes these, he actually gives 8 stages in that book, but the first 6 of those 8 stages that directly map in sequence with the seven valleys. However, he reveals this mystical discourse in connection with descriptions of history and the lives of the manifestations of God, just like the Kitab-i-Iqan does. And so I would like to actually present to the people here this idea of maybe this gives us a framework for looking at what the seven valleys is trying to get us to see. The seven valleys, it sounds in many ways like it's talking about our own evolution, and it kind of talks about us and our journey. But what if that journey is related to how we see the manifestations of God? What if that is a journey of recognition, and that is how we change, is through our relationship to the revelation? So in Gems of Divine Mysteries, I find this question at the very beginning. This is in page 4. Baha'u'llah says, "Know then that it behooveth thine eminence to ponder from the outset these questions in thy heart. What hath prompted the diverse peoples and kindreds of the earth to reject the apostles whom God hath sent unto them in his might and power, whom he hath raised up to exalt his cause and ordained to be the lamps of eternity within the niche of his oneness? For what reason have the people turned aside from them, disputed about them, risen against and contended with them? On what grounds have they refused to acknowledge their apostleship and authority, nay, denied their truth and reviled their persons, even slaying or banishing them?" And this question gets repeatedly asked, both in this text and in the Kitab-i-Iqan. Why? Why would humanity do this? For thousands of years, we can pray and await the advent of a promised messenger, but when that messenger comes, we completely turn the opposite way. We fight against them. We put them to death, revile them, exile them, imprison them. What in the world is going on here? How can we be so unable to recognize the very thing which countless generations have longed for? And I believe it comes down to a failure of vision. People look at the manifestations of God, but they only see a human being. They don't see that spiritual depth. They don't see the reality behind the physical reality. Or when they look at them and they listen to their teachings, they don't see the truth that they're expressing. They see their own ideas. They see a reflection of their own self. And that these texts, like Gems of Divine Mysteries and the Seven Valleys, they're pointing out to us how we can overcome such a failure of vision, how we can come to an understanding of the manifestations of God that leads to our recognition of their intrinsic unity, one with each other, and also the degree of their manifestation of God. My own journey through this text of the Seven Valleys, I said to you, when I first read it, it seemed to me like an enormous puzzle, because I read this book and I have to tell you, it made no sense to me at all. I would read each paragraph and I would wonder after every single paragraph, what in the heck did that even just say? Because as a brand new Baha'i, I had no understanding really of other religions at all. I was not used to texts of this nature, but the Seven Valleys is just filled with all of these references to things in the past, to sayings from the Quran, to stories and terminology that Sufis would be comfortable with. And to my limited mind, where I had grown up as a Christian, it was just straight over my head. So I love puzzles. And that's, I think, why I really became attached to this text, because I thought, oh no, this isn't going to defeat me. I'm going to keep reading this until I understand something of what it's trying to say, until there's some sort of clarity within it. And that's why I say it became a driver for me and like a home to my study of other things. And it also led me to studying Sufism, well, mainly because I really wanted to know what are all these stories and terminology that are being used, which then led me to studying Islam and wanting to gain a greater appreciation of Muhammad's life and the Quran. As well, Christian mysticism and the Gnostics, they too have a lot of great ideas about these subjects. And then finally, Zen Buddhism. And I was particularly driven to Zen Buddhism by some statements Baha'u'llah makes in, say, the Valley of Unity, where it just seemed like such a complete logical contradiction to me, what Baha'u'llah was saying, that I needed to gain a perspective in which I could understand it not as a contradiction. And I did find what I was looking for there in Zen Buddhism. But it was great for me to have this, like to be researching it, not just to read it just because, but as a way to get me closer to this these Baha'i writings. However, at the very end of it all, and as we're about to go into talking about the Seven Valleys, I really feel like there's very little that I can explain about them. I mean, that's really not why I'm here. The Seven Valleys is very much an experiential text. It's meant to be about spiritual and personal transformation, not just stuffing more facts into the brain. So even for me, when I look to the text, it's not so much that I'm trying to reach a point where I feel like I've understood it. The text itself is like a lodestone, and it's drawing me in a certain direction. I feel like, in a sense, it is a lure that is captivating my soul and drawing it from the matrix of this physical existence towards something else, towards something more real, but of which I only have the dimmest and faintest idea. And so that's how I use it. I use it as a text to push me forward. It has also caused me to study the limits of human conception and reason, because such limitations have a large part to do with why we fail to comprehend the station of the manifestations of God and to accept some of the things that they say to us. And further, the role of meditation, prayer, and mystical practice, and how important are these to Baha'i life. So as an inspiration, I wanted to share this quote from Gems of Divine Mysteries, viewing the text as, in a sense, this sort of gravity. Should there be ignited in thy heart the burning brand of the love of God, thou wouldst seek neither rest nor composure, neither laughter nor repose, but wouldst hasten to scale the highest summits in the realms of divine nearness, sanctity, and beauty. Thou wouldst lament as a soul bereaved and weep as a heart filled with longing. Nor wouldst thou repair to thy home and abode unless God would lay before thee his cause. So the Seven Valleys. This is the succession of these seven valleys with their original titles. And we now have a new translation within the last year of this text. It's found in a little booklet called Call of the Divine Beloved. And this text, this translation, is a fair bit more accurate than in the past, although I really love and appreciate Marziah Gale's translation as well. So in Marziah Gale's presentation, all seven are called valleys. In this new translation, it's much more accurate as to what the Persian terms for these seven stages were. But before I talk about these seven in particular, I want to talk about an idea from Sufism called a maqam, or a spiritual station. So in Sufism, there's this juxtaposition between two things that can occur in one's spiritual journey. They call them states, or halat, and stations, maqamat. A state is a spiritual state in which you may suddenly find yourself, either because of circumstance or by the grace of God. Like all of a sudden, you have this lofty and exalted perspective. You are filled with a renewed vigor and view of humanity. But just as quickly, it might pass away after. This is a spiritual state. A station is a non-regressive transformation in the vision of the individual. And it's very similar to a Greek idea of knowledge. So an example of this might be that if a young child has no knowledge of fire, for example, the parent might tell them, don't touch that. You're going to get burnt. And you can fill the child with knowledge about the danger of fire and how they should behave toward it. And you know where that hand is going, right? So the hand that has been burnt is the hand that has knowledge, and it does not reach into the fire again. And this is also a distinction in two words for knowledge used in Persian, ilm and irfan. One knowledge is like being told or reading a book on how to drive, and another is driving the car, in which you may not know anything about how the car operates, but the knowledge of what it means to drive the car sort of sinks into you and becomes instinctive. So for Sufis, there are these stations that we're going through, and that as we go through them, it does not become undone, because what you see is a different world. Your hand has been burnt, so to speak, and now you experience a different reality. And Baha'u'llah in the Seven Valleys does actually talk about certain stations as well as these seven valleys. And he presents the seven valleys in the context of three stations. And these three stations are the station of limitation, or maqam tahdid, and he groups the first three valleys within the station of limitation. In the station of limitation, we proceed towards understanding things in the context of their differences. It is all about outward appearances. It's seeing how things are different from each other and gaining knowledge about them from that perspective. So in the station of limitation, for example, Muhammad's station is very different from Christ's mission, which was very different from what Moses came to teach humanity. Another way to look at it is that as the sun is starting to creep up in the morning, like it did this morning in the dawn, before it crests the hill, the sky starts brightening. And you could say very much that light is from the sun, the exact same sun as the sun that appears at noon. But no one would confuse the time of noon with the time of pre-dawn. They would be completely different. So in the realm of limitation, that difference is paramount. And in fact, one may not yet even have an understanding of the sun, which is the unity of those two realities. So the person in the station of limitation is progressing through a refinement of their understanding of things through outward differences. And they come to an appreciation of the manifestations of God, but they may not yet know them all as the same name and the same soul, as Baha'u'llah talks about in the Iran. The next station is the station of unity, or maqam tawheed, where he groups another three valleys: unity, contentment, and wonderment. And in this valley, or this station, it is very much about seeing things from the perspective of the sun, or seeing it in terms of the sun. So you look at the dawn, you look at the early morning, you look at the noon, you acknowledge that there are differences. Those differences, of course, are not to be rejected. The rooster has a time. But your understanding of the relationship of those states is through the sun. It is not through studying the differences as seen from Earth. And then finally, the last station is called maqam fana az nafs va Baha'u'lláh. So it is annihilation and subsistence, or eternity in God. And there is one valley at this station, which is true poverty and absolute nothingness. And this is the station almost of seeing things from the perspective of the sun. Because here we are on the earth seeing the dawn time sun, the noontime sun, the sun in the springtime, the sun in the wintertime, and we're just seeing this world of changes. And we can come to an understanding that the sun is not changing, that the sun is the unifying point behind all of these differing realities. But when you go to the perspective of the sun and you try to see things from that perspective, well, you don't even see the earth, right? I mean, the brilliance is so constant and so unchanging that is all that has ever been. The sun has never shone any less or more brightly. The sun does not revolve around anything. It stays at its place in the center of the solar system. The reality of things according to the sun is just, it's true and constant. And so fana is this station where we give up the self. We give up this limited perspective, this limited reality. And in so doing, our will becomes subsumed in this eternity of God's reality. So this is another just brief summation of these three valleys. And I've been calling it a journey of recognition. And part of the reason I was clued into this idea was something Shoghi Effendi quotes in the World Order of Baha'u'llah. And I've only ever found it in that place, where Shoghi Effendi says that the station which he who hath truly recognized this revelation will attain is the same as the one ordained for such prophets of the house of Israel as are not regarded as manifestations endowed with constancy. So, outside of the prophets like Jacob and Joseph and Moses, you had a lot of other prophets. The houses of Israel were never without a prophet from generation to generation, but they were not all at this rank of having a book, being endowed with constancy. But just to think about that the station of a prophet of the house of Israel is attained merely through a recognition of this revelation. That puts a lot on what it means to recognize. What truly does it mean to have recognized the revelation of Baha'u'llah? And this is where I started thinking about the seven valleys as a journey of recognition, a journey leading to a station like this. And in the seven valleys itself, Baha'u'llah talks about this idea that it's dependent upon transformation of vision. He says, "It is clear to thine eminence that all the variations which the wayfarer in the stages of his journey beholdeth in the realms of being proceed from his own vision." So all these variations, all of these degrees proceed from our vision. It's just like the sun is one in its degree, but the sun as seen from the earth is variant. He also says, "Thus it hath been made clear that these stages," the ones he's describing in the seven valleys, depend on the vision of the wayfarer. So we begin in the valley of search. He says about the valley of search that the steed of this valley is patience. And one question that I've heard asked about the valley of search, which I think is a really great question, is how can we undertake this journey? How do we seek what we do not know? Because we're searching for this divine reality, but clearly we're searching for it because we haven't found it. So if we haven't found it, we don't already know what its characteristics are, what its reality is. So where do we go? What do we do? How do we look for it? And Baha'u'llah talks about how we have to have this patience. In fact, our patience should be to such an extent that if we were to journey for 100,000 years, we would not become saddened. And I like that in Conference of the Birds, Attar gets even a little bit more poetic with this idea of how long we should be willing to wait. Attar says, if a bird were to fly to the summit of a mountain and capture a pebble in its beak, and fly to the other side of the earth and deposit that pebble, and by so doing, move the entirety of the mountain from one side of the earth to the other side, and in this course of doing so, still not find what he's looking for, he should not in any way be dissuaded from his search. That's how Attar puts it. Baha'u'llah summarizes it by saying 100,000 years. So how can we seek what we do not know? And what I would suggest, what I propose here is that our nature is very special, right? We were created by God. We were associated with a soul at conception. So there is something to our reality that is, in a sense, special. We are like a magnet, and we are drawn to iron, or we are iron. Let's put it that way. We are iron, and we are drawn to the magnet. And it's like a compass. A compass is just a little magnetized needle suspended in some freely floating medium. And the reason why the compass is able to find its way north is because the earth produces this magnetic field. And the magnetic field is always there. But the compass has to be sensitized before it can detect the presence of this field. And not only that, after being sensitized, it has to be free. It has to be able to point in any direction whatsoever so that it can align itself. And so indwelling within our nature is this compass needle. And what we have to do is sensitize it and free it, and then pay attention and sort of like try to dwell within ourselves in prayer and meditation to try and read this compass and see which direction it's going to point us. But still, that's not the same as that which we seek. Another analogy that is used in the writings is that of the lover and his beloved. You know, if you've ever watched these romantic comedy movies, there are always people in these movies who are looking for love, right? But they don't know where to go to find it. They've heard about it. They believe that it's a real thing, but it's not like you can call somebody up from the phone book where it just says beloved under their name. You don't know who that person is going to be. In fact, the only thing that you can do is you can make yourself ready for that experience when you should happen upon it, and you should increase the diversity of your experiences. Put yourself out there. And when you find it, you will know, because the response to love is inbuilt within your nature. But you have to be patient as well, because the desire to be in love can itself become a veil, because you want the journey to end. You want to be someone who has found it. You don't want to dwell in this limbo of still seeking what it is that you want to find. So if it may take a year, it may take 10 years, it may take 50 years. You should be willing, in honor of that love, to not rest until you find the true thing, and you will know it. And in the Kitab-i-Iran, there's a section in the second part of that book that we often call the Tablet to the True Seeker. And Baha'u'llah talks about us refining and sensitizing ourselves to truth, and then not settling for seconds, pursuing, enduring in this search until we find what we're looking for. And he says, when you reach that point of discovering what you're looking for and of purifying your nature, it will become so obvious to you. It will be like the difference between day and night. It'll be like the wetness of water, he says. And so the Valley of Search, I think, is a lot about getting ourselves ready, preparing our nature. And Baha'u'llah says also in the Kitab-i-Iran that there are 3 attributes that are the most important for anyone who seeks to recognize the revelation of God. He says it is purity of heart, chastity of soul, and freedom of spirit. This purity of heart is what allows us to be sensitive. This chastity of soul is what prevents our desires from distracting us in any other direction. We have to be singular in our purpose. And this freedom of the spirit is what allows the needle to float freely and find its way north. So these qualities are truly essential, and the Valley of Search, in my view, is describing to us what this reality is and what it looks like and how essential it is to our progress. But again, as it is posed in the Kitab-i-Iran, it is also a search for the manifestation of God. And it is a search for recognition of the manifestation of God. Not merely the name, not merely I accept your claim, but who is the manifestation of God and who is he to my reality? In fact, he is the aim of all hopes. He is the goal of all aspirations. If there is anything in this life you have ever desired, ever wanted, and you see truly to the heart of that desire, you will find him there. It is some echo of his reality that has drawn you to that thing. So we go then to the Valley of Love. After one has sought, then this love just takes you over. It transports you. It transforms your being. It sets you aflame. And Baha'u'llah says that the steed of this valley is pain, which seems paradoxical because one should be very happy that their search has concluded and they found the thing they're looking for. What does this pain have to do with it? But in a way, it is to our benefit. It is there to guide us. Everything that is happening is to guide us. This pain is the sign of having found, because it is so easy in our nature. Our nature has been given certain qualities like desire and greed and all these other things, which, if applied toward God, find their true and highest expression. But they can so easily be distracted and misdirected to the things of this world, to materialism, to the kingdom of names, to self-love. So Baha'u'llah has also built into this reality that we're participating all in together now, these touchstones, these ways to know that we are making progress toward our beloved. And the proof of love is pain, because love without action and a welcome to suffering is merely the idea of love. When a person really loves something, you can stab them in the eyes and they will say, more, please. You know, if a person plays basketball, like I've tried, after 1 hour, I'm like, I don't want any more of this because I am worn out and my body is wrecked. But when a person loves basketball, they will play in thirst for that feeling of being completely worn out and wrecked. They want it. They want the relationship it gives them to the object of their desire. So our reaction to pain and disappointment demonstrates whether we have love for what we found or we simply want to have found it. The Valley of Love also describes not only what we must be willing to go through, but as I said, it's this guide to whether we found it. And that pain can take many, many forms. Baha'u'llah says that the true lover is the person where if he wades into a lake of fire, you will see him cool. Or if you dip him into the sea, he emerges dry. He is a person entirely at odds with the affairs of men. There's nothing that this world can throw at him where he does not say more, more. And there's this, my favorite poem in this is from Attar. It says, Kufre kafir ra va din dindar ra, zarre dardat del Attar ra. For the infidel error, for the faithful faith, for Attar's heart an atom of thy pain. All that Attar wants is relationship to his beloved. And if that relationship is to be found, if that connection is simply in one atom of pain, he would rather that than all the rest of the world. Let the others have faith. Let the others have the things that they seek from religion. I want only my beloved to the least extent, if that's all I can get. We go then from love to the realm of knowledge, all still within this station of limitation, where the wayfarer is constantly being driven from place to place, being cast about in the froth of this sea of differences and distinctions. In the realm of knowledge, Baha'u'llah says, that I now have just these little excerpts from each valley. Gazing with the eye of absolute insight, the wayfarer in this valley seeth in God's creation neither contradiction nor incongruity, and at every moment exclaimeth, no defect canst thou see in the creation of the God of mercy. Repeat the gaze. Seest thou a single flaw? And this really is the vision of this valley. When you look upon all things and you see the handiwork of God within it, both the positive and the negative. All of this wild craziness we're going through in 2020 and COVID and all of the horrors happening in the world, it's all part of a grand scheme. It's all part of a divine machinery. And one of the things that makes it hard to see this, one of the things that impairs our vision, is that we start out life in a material mode. We're born into a body with no knowledge of our soul. And so our understanding and our framework for understanding this reality is from the perspective of the body. So if you watch, for example, a movie from Hollywood, what is it that is so cherished in those movies is, for example, the well-being of the physical life of the heroes in that movie. For them to sacrifice their physical life is seen as, wow, that is the biggest thing that they could do. And an entire movie will spend the whole journey of the heroes going back just to save one person, for example. Because we put such store in the continuance of physical life, the experience of pleasure instead of pain, the acquisition of material goods and wealth over poverty. Like, these are the things that are important to the birds, to cows, to the wolves. Like, This is the framework in which we start out in understanding the world. And when you look at the world through that lens, you have to ask yourself, why does God let good people die? Why does God let infants be murdered? Why does God let horrible, horrible people just get away with the things that they do? It seems like a God of mercy and a God of goodness and knowledge could not possibly allow such a thing to exist. And the realm of knowledge is telling us that there is a bigger perspective than the material perspective. There is a higher form of understanding the wisdom of creation. And then, as I've been saying, I've been connecting this to our understanding of the manifestations of God. This relates to how we read their writings. It relates to the things that we find in their revelation. So when we read something in the text of the Quran or the Bible and it shocks us, or we wonder, what God is it that could reveal such a law? See it from the realm of knowledge. See it from a different eye than the material eye. And it really comes down to what is faith. If we know that God is all good, that would force us to change our interpretation of some of the things that we read. And then from the realm of knowledge, we then go into this station of unity, the first station of unity, where, and my excerpt here is, he sitteth, the seeker sitteth on the throne of, say all things are of God, and reclineth upon the seat of, there is no power nor strength but in God alone. He looketh upon all things with the eye of unity, and seeth the effulgent rays of the sun of truth shining from the dayspring of the divine essence upon all created things alike, and beholdeth the lights of unity reflected upon all creation. It is known to thine eminence that all the variations which the wayfarer in the stages of his journey beholdeth in the realms of being proceed from his own vision, as I quoted before. And this valley is really the valley where he digs into this idea of how it is that the stages of the journey depend upon the seeker's own vision. I want to spend a little bit of time here, maybe even the rest of the time that I have, on this valley, because the three after this are, they will take a much longer discussion. They're much harder to talk about. But this station of unity is so pivotal. It's the longest valley in the seven valleys, by far. It's at least twice as long as the second. And one of the reasons for its significance is that it connects very strongly to past Sufi ideas. So unity, the word here for unity is tawheed. And early on in Sufism, it was believed that this maqam tawheed was the highest station. This was as far as you could go in mystical understanding. And this station implied ecstatic union with the divine, seeing God in all things, even becoming God. And in fact, there is a famous figure in Sufism, Al-Hallaj, who famously said, Anna al-Haq. He said, I am the truth. And when they said to him, that is blasphemy, you must recant it, he refused and was willing to be put to death rather than give up this statement. Because to him, he had discovered this vision of Tawheed where there was nothing but God. And that included his own reality. Now, Baha'u'llah, in his texts, and especially in these texts where he's re-revealing, in a sense, these Sufi mystical expositions, he guides and corrects some of the earlier notions of Sufism. No Baha'i is going to say An al-Haq in the way that Al-Hallaj did, because Baha'u'llah has given us a fuller perspective on what the unity of God and what Tawheed means. And so some of the things that Baha'u'llah corrects from Sufism's concept of Tawheed is he upholds the law, the adherence of all beings to the law of God. Sufis often believed that when you reached this station of Tawheed, you were free from any material restriction, from anything worldly, which included worldly prescriptions found in the Quran. So if the Quran tells you that you can't eat with golden utensils, now you can eat with golden utensils, because what was in the Quran was for the lay people. It was for the people who did not yet understand that they were God. And if you are God, how can the revelation of God have prescriptions that apply to you? You are on the side of the revealer, not on the side of the one revealed to. He also upheld the station of the manifestations of God. So Muhammad was very much viewed as an intercessory agent So if you speak to Muslims, you'll find that they do not regard Muhammad in the same way that we regard Baha'u'llah. To them, Muhammad is a messenger who was relating word for word what the angel Gabriel was saying to him. So he was a divine channel, and they honor and respect the prophet, but they don't in any way pray to Muhammad, for example. They pray to God, which implies a direct relationship to God, where Muhammad is merely the bootstrap. He gets you into that relationship. Whereas for us, we see Baha'u'llah as the Sadratul Muntaha. We see him as the point beyond which there is no passing. We don't pray to anything beyond Baha'u'llah because we have no conception beyond that. We have no access beyond that. And Sufis believe that they did. And this also leads to Baha'u'llah very much stressing, and also in the Valley of Unity stressing, the perfect independence of God's essence. No matter how much we understand, how far we go, how unified we may become with God's emanation of his reality, we have never known his essence. We've never approached his essence. His essence is even the primal will. When Baha'u'llah in the tablet Rasha Amma, which Brian Miller's, oh no, sorry, Brian, you're talking about the Ode to the Dove. Sorry, there is another tablet in Call of the Divine Beloved, which is sprinklings of the cloud of unknowing. Even in that tablet, Baha'u'llah says that the creation of the primal will was not an act of God, because that would pose God in the frame of an actor doing something, which is a human conception. Rather, the primal will manifested itself from God's desire that it exist. Very mysterious. And so Baha'u'llah in the end is directing the seeker not toward this arrogation of God's station, but a complete and utter submission to God's will. And this perspective on divine unity, I also think provides an excellent context when we're reading Baha'i writings. When I read, for example, how Abdul-Baha says we should act toward people, how we should treat people. When I read those in the perspective of this divine unity described in Maqam Tawheed, it makes so much more sense, because I'm supposed to treat other people as if they were me, as if we were of the same essence. In this station of unity in the text of the Seven Valleys, it's filled with analogies, many more analogies than any of the other valleys, because Baha'u'llah is really trying to drive home this very complex subject. It is incredibly difficult in general for human beings to hold two opposing concepts in their mind at once. You know, when we say things are two sides of the same coin, to hold the two realities equally in mind as true. One being the world of appearances, distinctions, and differences, and one being the world of essences and perfect and intrinsic unity. And that these two realities perfectly coexist. They don't compete with each other. They're not opposed with each other. And in the realm of Sufism, they did become opposed to each other. And there were camps. There was one camp that believed in what they called wahdatul wujud, which is the unity of creation with God. And then another camp believed in reality as merely being reflective of God's spirit and essence, but not being the indwelling nature of God. There's a story of one time Baha'u'llah was in the mountains of Kurdistan, and he came upon a Sufi, an old man who was cooking dinner, and he invited Baha'u'llah to have dinner with him. I mean, imagine how lovely that is, to have a supper with Baha'u'llah, just the two of you. And Baha'u'llah asked him, what is it that is for dinner? And he said, I'm cooking God. And Baha'u'llah laughed at this, because he knew where he was coming from. This is the perspective of wahdatul wujud, this idea that there is nothing that is not God. Because if anything were not God, it would be competitive with God's reality. And that just can't be. And so different Sufi schools, they argued about this. The Shaykhis argued about it. The Babis argued about it. And Baha'u'llah really is the one who set everything straight. And he showed us that these two conceptions of reality, where we see a thing both as God and not God at the same time, that both have truth. And he describes this dualism through the analogy of the sun's light, and how the sun, the same light, can appear in different places with incredibly unique manifestations. In one place, it's like the fire in a crystal. In another place, it's in a mirror and it looks like the sun. And in another place, it merely reflects off of a flower. And so it shows a brilliant color. He gives the analogy of the colored spheres and how that same single light, white light, can become red in one place, yellow in another place, white in another place. It's not that the light is changing. It's that the nature of the object in which the light manifests brings out something different from the light. Baha'u'llah also in this valley strongly warns us against this confounding of appearance and essence. We shouldn't confuse the two. And in the Gems of Divine Mystery, he's even more emphatic in this warning. He spends an entire paragraph in that text telling us that if you were to reduce the realm of unity into the realm of limitation, that this would be akin to blasphemy. And that likewise, you can never take this scheme of separation and division and impose it upon the realm of unity. Sort of in a way saying, you cannot confound the station of Christ and Baha'u'llah, but at the same time, you cannot make a distinction between them. You cannot say that one is superior to the other because it is the same sun. It is merely shining at different times of day. He gives the analogy of the candle that is hidden in a lantern, always shining, always present and there, but until the lantern is removed, the candle won't be visible. And that's how he describes us, our reality. He gives the analogy of 4 divine worlds, one of which is the world of time, and one is the world of eternity. I will leave you to read the text because I'm now out of time. But he ends then with the analogy of father and son. And he talks about how the father is a son to his father, and the son is a son to his father, and that each one has a different station depending on which direction he's looking. If the father looks back in time, he is himself a son. If he looks forward in time, he is a father. And thus, what he knows himself to be is dependent upon perspective. It's dependent upon vision. And vision then is the fulcrum around which we shift our understanding of the revelation of God. And that is all of the time that I have. I am sorry I cannot content you with a description of the Valley of Contentment, but I will welcome any questions in this 5 minutes that we have, and I will give the mic back to my co-host Azadeh.
Oh, we are so not content.
You're not content.
Yep.
Well, I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you. I was just going to turn it over to Nabil to see if there is anything in the chat room that people have.
No, there is none in the chat room. Shala, please go ahead, Khanum.
My question is this. Allah Apar to start with. Thank you so much. I'm so glad I made it. I almost was going to be late to the 7 Valleys, so I got there at the beginning. My question is this, you told the story about this Sufi inviting Baha'u'llah to dinner. I don't know if I'm right or wrong. Is it they believe that all is from God? Do we believe that all is from God? And what's the difference?
Yes. So the doctrine of Wahdatul Wujud was that all is God. There is no extant reality that is not God. And then the other perspective was that all things are from God or revelatory of God. Sort of like Muhammad was not God himself, rather Muhammad spoke the words of God that moved through him. And they were very much contending positions. But we as Baha'is believe that there is a unification of these two perspectives. There is no reality but God, yet the reality that we see is a contingent reality. It is a transitory mode through which God may be known, but that does not mean it has reality in the sense that we're used to thinking of existence and reality. In the same way that if you project light up onto a wall, You can show someone a movie. You can express to them an entire story and they will feel a relationship to those characters even. But all you've done is spray photons on a wall. You never actually made those things to exist by projecting them there.
Thank you.
I have quite a bit of homework.
John, Lyle has a question, please. Hey, Lyle, how are you?
Yes, good morning and aloha to everyone. There was a beautiful paper that was submitted by Bahá'u'lláh back in 2014 in the Journal of Baha'i Studies. It's called The Silences of God. I gave attachment to Nabil. Someday, if he wants to share it with everyone, or if anybody would like a copy, it's in the, pretty well freely available if you can look it up. It's probably the most amusing and wonderful thing that you could read. I laughed heartily when I read it, and it's a serious topic. But in the final section of it, there's a beautiful tablet that there isn't much of it. There's a tablet referred to from Baha'u'llah, and it's called the Ma'idi Yasmani. And Baha'u'llah refers to the future. He says that in the past, that the divine standard for recognizing the manifestations has been revealed verses. This is the standard whereby we have recognized the revelations of the past from God. But there will be a time, the next manifestation, and he refers to the one in the future. He says that the standard for discourse, he implies that the standard for discourse among the people of God, the believers, is the divine verses.
Mm.
So that we are to raise our discourse to the level of the standard of the divine verses, the revelation. And that in the future, that there would be a proof other than the revelation of divine verses, whereby we would recognize the next manifestation. Which brings an interesting question. Is there any other discussion of this that anyone has ever ran across in the writings that both of any language, Persian, Arabic, Turkish, any language that we've ran across that talks about this proof other than the revelation of divine verses, if those are indeed our standard, that whereby we raise our discourse to that our standard of discourse amongst ourselves for the people of Baha, that what is the proof other? Because Bahia implies that what if the proof is that we recognize the next manifestation by how they carry themselves, how they manifest their silence. How would we recognize the manifestation of God by their mere beingness amongst themselves, that we become so refined that we would know them by their beingness. But this is an interesting topic, but I'm just put it forth because when I ran across this in this beautiful beautiful work of hers, it's worth reading, but I put this forth as just an interesting topic. But I just wondered if anybody had ran across it and I put it forth as a question. John, had you heard of this?
No, and to any question about the future, I say, ask me later.
I'll see you in the next world and we'll know for certain from there, right?
That's right.
A lot of us have this discussion. A lot of us, when we sit around, we think, how is it going to be? Who is going to be? And some of us have come to the conclusion that's a woman from Venus.
But Bahia Nakajivani would sit around and talk with her brother in the World Center when they would get together, and they would have this kind of learned discussion upon this topic also, because of course he had access to the writings in many of their forms, translated and untranslated into the English tongue. And I think they would, have this. But this is one of the probably the most, the best sources that you could ever have on this topic. And it's a very good article. and probably one of the best places to go. If you want to read on this, I recommend it. Like I said, I passed it along to Nabil, and if you want to contact me by email, I can attach it and respond.
I posted it in the chat.
We have a hand up from Brian.
I just want to express my appreciation, John. This has been a delightful discussion that you have offered us, and you have opened many vistas in the Seven Valleys for us to contemplate, and I just want to thank you for that. And also say that you have set a high bar for the rest of us.
I have no fear that you will exceed it, Brian. Brian is a very old friend of mine from 25 years ago, even. And we've spent many, many a time discussing the revelation together. It's good to see you here, Brian.
Your Persian and Arabic is pretty good.
Mercy.
So I'm wondering, are you half Persian or did you study the language?
I started studying it at the same time that I became a Baha'i. In fact, after I declared, the next day, I was at the house of, their name will come to me, but somebody said, you're going to learn Persian. And they actually sat down with me at a table that day and wrote out the alphabet. And they said, I want you to start practicing these letters. So literally day one, somebody was telling me how to start studying Persian.
I wish someone had done that to me.
Yeah, no, and really, I didn't get a chance to say it in this presentation, but it's impossible for me to express how poetic and beautiful a text like the Seven Valleys is in its original. It is so much easier to memorize passages in the original for the Seven Valleys because they all rhyme. There's not only a rhyming pattern, there's a flow and a cadence to his writing. And you just realize that not only is the subject matter so majestic and so beautifully said, but it's a work of art, truly. It is a masterpiece. And I just love it. Like, I'll read to you, I mean, just one example of how it sounds, the poetry in the original. In the Valley of Knowledge, he says, Himmati bayad, ta dar talabash kushim, va jahdi bayad, ta az shahd waslash nushim. Agar az in jam noosh konim, alami faramush konim. And so he just has this rhyming pattern and this way that he lays it out that you could literally typeset it as a poem. And the whole text is like that. It's amazing.